Okay, so for rational exponents, let's go ahead and look at what we mean by this. So we're going to look at the meaning of a to the 1 divided by n and a raised to the power m divided by n. So remember the idea of rational. So examples of rational numbers. So these are examples of rational numbers. And remember, a rational number is a fraction or a number where the numerator is an integer and the denominator is an integer. So 3/4 is a rational number. And so that's what you see here. You see 1 divided by n, some number, and then m divided by n. But keep in mind that the denominator cannot equal 0. All right, because remember, if the denominator is equal to 0, that's undefined. Okay, so let's look at these examples. So the examples will be something like this. So the directions will say this. Directions will say write each of the following. Write each of the following in radical notation. Radical notation. And simplify. Okay, so write each of the following in radical notation and simplify. All right, now let's talk about, before we do that, let's talk about what this means right here. So a to the 1 divided by n as a radical. So in radical notation means this. So you can rewrite this as the nth root. So the denominator is the index. So the nth root of a, that's what that means. A to the 1 over n means the nth root of a. Okay? So for example, 3 to the 1/2 means the square root of 3. The denominator is your index, and the numerator that you see here, the 1, is your exponent, so 3 to the 1st. The 4 raised to the 1/5 is the 5th root of 4. That's what that means. So this is written as a rational exponent. This is written as a radical. So this is radical notation. All right. So notice the denominator is your index. The numerator is that exponent 4 to the 1st power. All right. So that's what that means. So a to the 1 divided by n means the nth root of a. That's what that means. Now be careful. Don't put the n in front. If you put the n in front, that means you're multiplying. That n here is the index. You need to make sure it looks like an index. If it looks like this, that is not true. That does not mean the same thing. And you will lose points because you didn't write the index correctly. So keep that in mind. Now for this one right here, a to the m divided by n is that same idea. Okay, so watch. A to the m divided by n. So remember, the denominator is your index. So that means the nth root of a to the m power. That's what that means. M divided by n. And you had that idea in several of your worksheets about a couple of weeks ago where you had to simplify radicals. So remember when you had something like this, where you had the cube root of x to the 12th power? So remember we said 12 divided by 3, m divided by n. That's what this is. All right, so this can be written as x to the 12 divided by 3, which you wrote as x to the 4th. So you may recall from a worksheet earlier, maybe last week or the week before, where you had things like this. The cube root of x to the 12th, 12 divided by 3 is 4. That's what you're doing, m divided by n, m divided by n. All right, so the denominator is your index, the numerator is your exponent. Now keep in mind that you can also write this as the nth root of a, all raised to the m power. So that numerator is the exponent. The denominator is the index. That's the index, that's the exponent. So meaning this, your index is the denominator, the m is your exponent. You can put the exponent under the radical or you can put it outside. most of the time when you're asked to simplify, you're going to want to put it outside. So as you do those problems in a little while, you're going to notice I'm going to put the exponent, the numerator, on the outside. Okay? All right, so an example like we did here, an example would be something like this. So where you have, let's say, 3 raised to the 2/5. So in radical notation, as a radical, that would be, remember the denominator index will be the 5th root of 3 squared, or the 5th root of 3 all raised to the 2nd power. Notice I put that in parentheses. If you're going to put on the outside, make sure you put this in parentheses. Okay. Okay, so let's look at some examples. So here are the directions. So write each of the following in radical notation and simplify. All right, number 1. 64 raised to the 1/3 power. Okay? Radical notation. So the worksheet you're going to have will say put in radical notation. So this is radical notation. So according to these rules, this one and this one, the denominator is your index, the numerator is your exponent. So that will be the cube root of 64. All right, simplify. So then it's going to ask you to simplify. And you just figure out what the cube root of 64 is. So for example, let's try something. Remember, the cube root of 64 means what times itself is, oops, I'm sorry. The cube root of 64 means what times itself 3 times is 64. Now, it may or may not be a nice number, may or may not be a whole number, but these will be. These will be nice numbers. Okay, so let's try 3 times 3 times 3 and see if that works. So 3 times 3 is 9. 9 times 3 is 27. So that didn't work, right? So let's try 4 times 4 times 4. So 4 times 4 times 4. So 4 times 4 is 16. 16 times 4 is 64. So the answer is 4. So that is the answer. All right, so when you do the worksheet, the directions, make sure you follow the directions. So the first thing you're going to do is write in radical notation. Then you're going to simplify. You may have to go off to the side and simplify to get that answer. All right, number 2. Negative 81 to the 1/4. Now you got to be careful with this one, because what some students are going to make a mistake, and I'm going to go ahead and put that here on another sheet. So some students are going to make this mistake. I'm going to go ahead and put that one over here. Negative 81 raised to 1/4. I want you to remember something from a previous course. So recall from a previous course. Remember that there is a difference between 3 squared versus negative 3 squared. There's a difference between those two. For 3 squared, that's easy. What's being squared is 3, so 3 squared means 3 times 3, which is 9. That right here does not mean negative 3 times negative 3. That's not what that means. You got to be careful. What's being, oh, and by the way, also versus negative 3 squared like this. So let me go ahead and put that one as well. So notice that this right here has parentheses, right? So what this means is negative 3 times negative 3. This right here does not mean that. This means that negative 3 times negative 3 is a positive 9. So this is 9. This right here, that means you take, what's being squared is 3 only. So you take 3 squared and you multiply 3 by itself. So 3 times 3 is 9, so this becomes a negative 9. So negative 3 squared is negative 9. So there is a difference between negative 3 squared and negative 3 in parentheses squared. So that takes us to this. There's no parentheses here, right here. There's no parentheses here. So what's being raised to the 1/4 power is 81 only. Okay? So in radical notation, you're going to say negative 4th root of 81. Negative 4th root of 81. So that's radical notation. That's the radical notation. And now we go to simplify. So think about the fourth root of 81. What times itself 4 times is 81? All right, well, try some numbers like 2, 3, 4, and so on. Let's try 3. 3 should work. 3 times 3 is 9, right? 3 times 3 is 9. 9 times 9 is 81. So the answer is 3. So this becomes negative 3, though. So the answer is negative 3. So that's a simplify. So that's radical notation. That's simplified. Number 3, you have y to the 20th raised to the 1/5. Y to the 20th raised to the 1/5. Radical notation. Radical notation means the 5th root of y to the 20th. And now that looks like something you had a week ago or a week and a half ago. 20 divided by 5 is 4. So simplified, the answer is y to the 4th power. And that's it. That's all you do. All right, number 4. Number 4, we have, let's see. We have 625 x to the 8th power, y to the 4th, raised to the 1/4. All right, so remember the 1/4 is up here. So the 4 is your index, the 1's the exponent. So as a radical, this is going to be the fourth root. Make sure it looks like an index of 625 x to the 8th, y to the 4th. And these are easy to deal with. So let's think about what the fourth root of 625 is. So go off to the side and ask yourself, what is the fourth root of 625? All right, what is that equal to? What is this equal to? Well, what times itself 4 times is 625? And again, those will be some nice numbers. So you'll be able to figure that out. It won't be any decimals or anything like that. It will be whole numbers that you're going to use. So try, let's say 5. Since that's a 5, 25 in the end, let's try 5. See if that works. 5 times 5 times 5 times 5. So 5 times 5 is 25. 5 times 5 is 25. 25 times 25, I'm using a calculator, is 625. So that's a 5 here. So far we get 5. Now remember, in the worksheet you had previously, the fourth root of x to the 8, 8 divided by 4 is 2. So you get x squared. 4 divided by 4 is 1, so that's just y. So there's your answer. So this is your radical notation, radical. This is your simplified. So that's what you get when you simplify. All right, number 5. We have 32 divided by 243 raised to the 1/5. So again, we're dealing with 1/5. So 32 divided by 243 raised to the 1/5. So radical notation. Here's what you're going to write. You're going to say the 5th root, the denominator is your index, of 32 divided by 243. Your numerator is your power, but that's just 1. So the numerator is just 1. That's all you write. Now you got to go ahead and figure out. So let's go ahead and simplify this. So you got to simplify. So there's going to be a space where you have to simplify. You have to write the answer for that part. So let's talk about the 5th root of 32. Let's see what that is. So what times itself 5 times is 32? That's your question. Well, let's try 2. 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times 4 is 16. 16 times 2 is 32. So the answer is 2. So the numerator is 2. The numerator is 2. The 5th root of 32 is 2. Now that may be a little bit harder, the 5th root of 243. I'm trying to figure that part out. So what times itself 5 times is 243? Well, let's try 3. See if that's going to work. 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times 3 is 9. 9 times 9 is 81, right? And then 81 times this 3. Let's see what that gives. I'm using a calculator. 81 times 3, oops, 81 times 3 gives us 243. So the answer here is 3. So the answer is 2/3. So the fifth root of 32 divided by 243 is 2/3. All right, that's number 5. Okay, number 6, we have this for number 6. We have 16x to the 8th divided by 25y to the 10th, all raised to the 1/2 power. Okay, as a radical, so we want to write this as a radical. So as a radical, you're going to say, well, since the denominator is 2, that's the index, and the numerator is 1, that's your exponent. You're going to write this as the square root of 16x to the 8th divided by 25y to the 10th. And then your answer, when you simplify this, that's easy. So let's think about the numerator. So the numerator, you have 16x to the 8th. Remember, those are what you're doing here, the easy kinds. The square root of 16 is 4. 8 divided by 2 is 4, so that's x to the 4th. So the numerator is 4x to the 4th. The denominator, you have the square root of 25y to the 10th. The square root of 25 is 5. The square root of y to the 10th, 10 divided by 2 is 5, so that's y to the 5th. So you get 4x to the 4th divided by 5y to the 5th. And so that's the answer there. So there's radical notation, and that's the answer you get when you simplify. Okay, number 7. So let's do number 7. All right, number 7, we have 8 raised to the 2/3. All right, now this time the numerator is not a 1 anymore. So remember what we talked about earlier before we started this. So in terms of a radical, here's how you're going to write this. In terms of radical notation, you're going to say the cube root, remember your denominator is your index, the cube root of 8 squared like this, or you can say the cube root of 8 squared like that. Okay? This is the one that's easier to deal with because to simplify, remember you got to simplify, right? So to simplify, you know what the cube root of 8 is. Cube root of 8, and whatever that is, you're going to square it. So that's this right here. Well, the cube root of 8 is 2. Well, what's 2 squared? 2 squared, see that's this right here. This is this. 2 squared is 4. So the answer is 4. So 8 to the 2/3 is 4. So there's your radical notation. You got to show one of these. This is the one you're going to use to simplify, though. And you get 4 as the answer. Number 8, you have 100 raised to the 6/4. 100 raised to the 6/4. Now, before we write it in radical notation, you can simplify 6/4. So do that first. So you get 100 raised to 3/2. That makes things so much easier for you. Now let's write this as a radical. So in radical notation, this becomes the square root. Your denominator is your index, so the square root of 100 to the 3rd power like this, or you can write this as the square root of 100 cubed like this. To simplify, though, you're going to use this one rather than this one. Use this one because look, you all know what the square root of 100 is. The square root of 100 is 10. And all you have to do is cube 10. Well, remember 10 to the 3rd power means 10 times 10 times 10, which is 1,000. So the answer is 1,000. Number 9, you have negative 27 raised to the 2/3. All right, now notice negative 27 is in parentheses. So when you write this as a radical, in radical notation, you're going to say the cube root of negative 27 squared like this. So put negative 27 in parentheses. Okay? It has to be in parentheses. That's important. Or you can write it like this: the cube root of negative 27 raised to the second power. Now that does not have to be in parentheses, the negative 27. Negative 27 has to be in parentheses here. It does not have to be in parentheses here. Okay? So if you wrote this, I just want to remind you, if you wrote this, that is not the same as that. When you square this, you're squaring the 27. You're squaring 27. And then it's negative. So watch, I want to show you something. This right here is not the same. Not the same. I want to show you this. So watch, we're gonna take negative 27 squared. I'm gonna put it in the calculator just as you see it. Negative 27 squared. So when you do that, you get a negative 729. So this is the cube root of negative 729. Then I'm going to take the cube root of that. So to take the cube root, on your calculator, on mine, I got to do this. I got to put 3 first, then second. So that's cube root, negative 729. And I get negative 9. So that's negative 9. Okay, so this right here is negative 9. But that's not what this is. Because look, if I do this right here, okay, so put that in parentheses. So watch. Cube root, parentheses, negative 27, close the parentheses, and I'm squaring it. Watch what's going to happen. Okay, I put something wrong in there. I multiplied by 2 instead of squaring. Let me do this over. So, cube root, parentheses, negative 27, close the parentheses. I'm squaring it, so now I'm squaring. When I do that, I get a positive 9. Not a negative 9. So this is negative 9. This is positive 9, which is what it is simplified. All right, so it is important when you see a negative, you got to be careful. You got to think about, well, I need to be careful it's the negative, because if I write it one way, it's incorrect. So I got to be careful. Now, let's look at this. If you did this one, this is the one I would use to simplify. Now, remember, you don't use your calculator with this, because you got to be able to do it without a calculator. But this is the one you're going to use. So watch. The cube root of negative 27 squared. We all know what the cube root of negative 27 is. The cube root of negative 27 is a negative 3, right? The cube root of negative 27 is negative 3, because negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3, negative 3 times negative 3 is 9. 9 times negative 3 is a negative 27. That's what this is. So that's negative 3. But I'm squaring it, and a negative 3 times itself is a positive 9, and that's what you see here. All right, so that was a lot of discussion on this because there was a negative involved. Many of you are going to forget about this parentheses that's important here. You're going to write it like this, and you're going to mess up. Many students, though, that tend to rewrite this where the numerator is the exponent on the outside, they tend to not mess up because there's no parentheses that's needed here. A parentheses is needed here, but it's not needed here. All right, so just be careful with something like number 9, depending on how you write it. Okay, number 10. So in number 10, we have this for number 10. We have 49, a to the 4th power, b to the 12th, all raised to the 5/2 power. So 49, a to the 4th, b to the 12th, all raised to the 5/2 power. So as a radical, so this is a radical notation. You're going to write this as the square root. So the denominator is your index. So square root of 49, a to the 4th, b to the 12th. All raised to the 5th power. Okay? This is the way I would write this. If you write it the other way, where the numerator is inside, you got to be careful. You have to use this. You must use this. You must say, parentheses, 49, a to the 4th, b to the 12th, all raised to the 5th. That's how you write that. So, you got to be careful. When you rewrite this in radical notation, Remember, the denominator is your index, so that's the easy kind. The numerator is your exponent. Students that write the numerator and they put the exponent on the outside make less errors than students that put on the inside, because if they put on the inside, you will need to put parentheses around the radicand that's here, because all of this has to be raised to the fifth power. So it's important that you remember that. So don't write it like this. Some of you are going to do that and you're going to be upset with yourself. Don't write it as, and you're going to do this: 49, a to the fourth, b to the 12th, and you're going to say 5. Well, what's being raised to the fifth power? Is it just this? If it's just this, you better put that in parentheses. But it's the whole thing, right? So be careful. Don't write it like that. Okay. Now, when you simplify, this one is so much easier to deal with than this one. If you use this one, you got to raise 49 to the fifth power first. Then you got to raise a to the fourth to the fifth power. Then you got to raise b to the 12th to the fifth power. And then you take the square root. It is so much easier to deal with this when the exponent is on the outside. So watch how easy this is. I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this right here. So the fifth root of 49, a to the fourth, b to the 12th. So let's look at that first. The fourth root of 49 is 7, right? The square root of 49, excuse me. Square root of 49 is 7. 7 times 7 is 49. The square root of a to the fourth, 4 divided by 2 is 2, so that's a squared. The square root of b to the 12th, 12 divided by 2 is 6, so that's b to the 6th. So that's what this is. But remember, you got to raise it to the fifth power. So now we have to say 7a squared b to the 6th, now raised to the fifth power. All right? Now you got to simplify that. So we got to remember what this means. Now, at that point, you will need to use a calculator because you're saying 7 to the 5th, a squared to the 5th, b to the 6th, raised to the fifth power. That's what this means. So on your calculator, though, 7 to the 5th, you got to use your calculator with that. So you're going to say 7 raised to the 5th is 16,807. 7 to the 5th power is 16,807. So that's going to go here. Okay. A squared raised to the 5th. Now remember, that was a property you learned. Let me go ahead and write it like this. A to the b power raised to the c. When you have a power raised to a power, you multiply. So that's a to the b times c. So what that means is a squared raised to the 5th. When you have a power raised to power, you multiply those exponents. So 2 times 5 is 10. So this right here is a to the 10th power. So I get a to the 10th. And b to the 6th raised to the 5th. 6 times 5 is 30. So that right here is b to the 30th power. And so there's your answer when you simplify. All right, so let's look at another one. So let's look at number 11. So number 11, let's suppose we had 8 x to the, and let me go ahead and make it 12, y to the 6, all raised to the 2/3 power. So let's look at that one. All right, so as a radical, there are two ways you can write this. You can write it as a cube root, 3 is your index, cube root of 8 x to the 12th, y to the 6th, all raised to the second power like that. Or you can write this as the cube root of 8 x to the 12th, y to the 6th, that being raised to the second power. So you can put the numerator, which is your exponent, on the outside or the inside. But on the inside, you got to put that in parentheses. But when you simplify, this is the easier one to use. Use this one. Because, let's think about it. I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this right here. The cube root of 8 x to the 12th, y to the 6th, and whatever that is, I've got to square it. Well, the cube root of 8 is 2. The cube root of x to the 12th, 12 divided by 3, that's easy. 12 divided by 3 is 4, so that's x to the 4th. the cube root of y to the 6, 6 divided by 3 is 2. That's y squared. But remember, you got to square that. So that is this, but remember, you got to square it. And all you do is square this. 2 to the second power is 4. X to the fourth, remember this, let me go ahead and rewrite it like this. 2 to the second, x to the fourth squared, y squared squared. So you're squaring each of these. 2 to the second is 4. X to the fourth, when you have a power raised to a power, you multiply. 4 times 2 is 8. 2 times 2 is 4. And that's your answer. So that's your answer simplified. 4, x to the 8th, y to the 4th. Okay? And let's do number 12. So let's make number 12 easy, and then we'll look at the next part. So number 12, let's suppose we had x to the 24th, all raised to the 7/8 power. Okay, that's an easy one right here. It obviously looks a lot easier than this one or this one. All right, but remember, as a radical, this means this. It means the eighth root of x to the 24th, all raised to the 7th power, or the eighth root of x to the 24th, that in parentheses, raised to the 7th power. So notice when I put the numerator, which is going to be the exponent, on the inside, I need parentheses inside as well. All right. It is so much easier to write it like this because when you simplify, this is so much easier to simplify than this one. So let's look at this one. The eighth root of 24, I'm sorry, the eighth root of y to the 24th. 24 divided by 8 is 3, so that's just y cubed. So that is this. So that becomes y cubed raised to the 7th now. And so the answer is simplified. The answer is simplified. When you have a power raised to power, you multiply. 3 times 7 is 21. So that's y to the 21st. So this right here is radical notation. And this is your answer simplified. All right. So we did a lot of stuff with this part. And so this part right here dealt with, let me go ahead and find the original page real quick. So this is the part that dealt with rational exponents. All right. So that should help you with a couple of the worksheets that's due this week. Okay, so now let's look at